Have you ever cried, not because you're weak, but because you're exhausted from trying so hard? I don't mean the dramatic kind of crying people see. I mean the quiet kind. The kind where you sit alone, staring at your phone, wondering why everything feels heavier than it should. You tell yourself you'll figure things out tomorrow, but tomorrow comes, and somehow the weight is still there. Maybe you feel behind. Maybe you feel like everyone else is moving forward while you're stuck in the same place. Or maybe you just feel tired. Not physically, mentally, emotionally. Like your mind has been fighting a battle nobody else can see. And here's the strange part. You keep telling yourself something dangerous. If I cry, it means I'm losing. But what if that belief is completely wrong? What if crying isn't the moment you give up? What if it's the moment something inside you refuses to quit? Think about it for a second. How many times have you pushed yourself through something painful? A breakup, a rejection, a failure that made you question everything. And in that moment, the tears came. Not because you were weak, but because something inside you cared too much to stay numb. Be honest for a moment. Have you ever felt embarrassed for feeling too much? Like you should be tougher, stronger, more put together. Almost like emotions are some kind of flaw you're supposed to hide. A lot of people feel that way. And that's where the real problem begins. Because most people misunderstand what pain actually means. They think pain is a signal to stop, to walk away, to protect themselves. But here's something nobody tells you. Pain is often the first signal that you're growing. But wait until you hear this. Your mind doesn't automatically understand that. Your brain is wired to avoid discomfort. It tries to convince you that quitting will make things easier. And sometimes it whispers things like, "This is too hard. You're not ready. Maybe this just isn't for you." And if you've ever heard those thoughts in your head, you're not alone. Every person who has ever achieved something meaningful has heard that same voice. The difference is what they do next. Some people listen to that voice. They step back. They tell themselves they'll try again later. And slowly, they start building a life that feels safe, but quietly disappointing. But other people do something strange. They cry. They feel everything. The frustration, the doubt, the fear of failing again. They let it all hit them. And then, they keep going. Now here's the part most people never understand. Those tears aren't weakness. They're pressure releasing, like steam escaping from something powerful. Think about a runner training for a marathon. Their muscles burn, their lungs scream, their body wants them to stop. But that pain is proof something is changing. And emotional pain works the same way. When you feel overwhelmed, it's often because something inside you is expanding. Your standards, your awareness, your desire for something better. But here's where it gets real. Most people quit during this exact moment, not because they're incapable, but because they misunderstand what they're feeling. They assume the struggle means they're failing, when in reality, it often means they're closer than they think. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been one decision away from quitting, and then later realized you were closer to a breakthrough than you thought? It's strange how often that happens. And this is where the story changes. Because the moment you realize that pain isn't the enemy, everything starts to look different. Your tears stop feeling like defeat. They start feeling like proof that you care enough to keep fighting. And something subtle begins to shift. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" And that single question changes everything. But before we go further, there's something important you need to understand. Because the real reason people give up has almost nothing to do with failure. It has to do with something far more dangerous, something happening quietly inside their mind. And once you see it, you'll never look at struggle the same way again. The real reason people give up isn't failure. It's the story they start telling themselves about the failure. And most of the time, that story is brutal. You miss an opportunity, and suddenly your mind whispers, "See, you're not good enough." You make a mistake, and it adds, "You always mess things up." One bad day becomes proof that your entire future is falling apart. And the scary part? You start believing it. Not because it's true, but because your brain loves patterns. It wants quick explanations for pain, so it builds a narrative, a simple one. If this hurts, it must mean something is wrong with me. But here's the twist nobody warns you about. That voice in your head, it's not trying to destroy you. It's trying to protect you. Your brain hates uncertainty. It hates the risk of embarrassment, rejection, failure. So when things get uncomfortable, it tries to shut the whole process down. Let's just stop. Let's avoid this. Let's do something easier. Sounds familiar? Think about the last time you wanted to improve something in your life. Maybe it was your career, your health, your confidence. You started with excitement, energy, motivation. But then reality showed up. Progress was slower than you expected. Results didn't appear overnight. And suddenly, your mind started negotiating with you. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. Maybe this isn't the right time. Be honest with yourself for a moment. Have you ever delayed something important, not because you couldn't do it, but because you were afraid it wouldn't work? Most people have. In fact, that quiet hesitation is one of the biggest dreams killers in the world. And here's why. When you delay action, you create distance between who you are and who you could become. But wait, this is where it gets interesting, because the people who eventually succeed don't eliminate fear. They change how they interpret it. Instead of seeing fear as a stop sign, they see it as a signal that they're moving towards something meaningful. Think about it. Nobody feels afraid doing something pointless. Fear appears when something matters, when there's something at stake, your reputation, your future, your identity. And that's why the moments that make you want to cry are often the exact moments that shape your success. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Success rarely looks heroic while you're living through it. From the outside, people see the victory, the achievement, the result. But from the inside, it often looks messy, confusing, full of doubt. There are nights where you question everything, moments where you wonder if the effort is worth it. And sometimes, yes, you cry. But those tears are different now. They're not the tears of surrender. They're the tears of pressure, like a storm passing through before the sky clears. And something powerful happens when you allow yourself to feel that storm without running from it. You start building emotional endurance, the ability to experience discomfort without collapsing. And that ability, it changes the trajectory of your entire life. Because once you realize that pain doesn't control you, you become dangerous to every limitation you once believed. Let me ask you something strange. What if the biggest obstacle in your life isn't failure, but comfort? Comfort tells you to stay where you are. Comfort says, this is good enough. Comfort keeps you scrolling, waiting, delaying. But growth? Growth asks something harder. It asks you to risk being seen trying, risk looking inexperienced, risk falling short. And here's a quiet confession most people won't admit. Sometimes we cry, not because life is hard, but because deep down, we know we're capable of more. And ignoring that feeling hurts. Think about that for a moment. Is the pain in your life coming from failure, or from the gap between who you are and who you know you could be? Don't answer out loud. Just sit with it. Because that question leads to something uncomfortable, but also incredibly freeing. Once you face that gap, you stop waiting for motivation. You stop waiting for the perfect time, and instead, you start moving differently. But this next part changes everything. Because the people who turn their tears into success discover one simple mindset shift. And once it clicks, quitting stops being an option.
Here's the mindset shift that quietly separates people who give up from people who eventually win. They stop asking life to be easier, and they start asking themselves to become stronger. At first, that idea sounds simple. almost obvious. But when you really sit with it, it changes how you see every challenge in your life. Because most people are constantly negotiating with reality. They say things like, "This shouldn't be happening. Why is this so difficult? Why does everything feel harder for me?" And the more you repeat those thoughts, the heavier life starts to feel. Not because the situation is impossible, but because your mind is fighting against it. Imagine trying to swim while pushing against the current. Every movement feels exhausting. Now imagine turning your body and using the current instead. Same river, completely different experience. And that's exactly what happens when you change your relationship with struggle. Instead of resisting difficulty, you start accepting it as part of the process, not punishment, not proof that you're failing, just the price of building something meaningful. But wait, here's where it gets real. Accepting struggle doesn't mean you suddenly enjoy pain. Nobody enjoys rejection. Nobody enjoys failure. Nobody enjoys those moments when you feel like you're falling behind. But acceptance removes the shock. And that changes everything. Because the moment you stop expecting life to be easy, you stop being surprised when it isn't. And when you're not surprised by hardship, you're prepared for it. That preparation builds something incredibly powerful: mental endurance, the ability to keep moving, even when emotions are messy. And once you develop that skill, a strange thing happens. Situations that once broke you start strengthening you instead. Think about someone learning to lift weights. The first time they try, everything feels impossible. Muscles shake. The weight feels unbearable. But with repetition, the same weight becomes manageable, then easy. Then eventually, it becomes too light. Life works the same way. Every challenge you face increases your emotional strength, if you allow it to. But here's the catch most people miss. Growth doesn't come from the struggle itself. It comes from how you respond to it. Two people can experience the same setback. One says, "This proves I'm not capable." The other says, "This is training." Same situation, different future. Now here's a question worth asking yourself. When things get difficult, which voice inside your head gets louder? The voice that says quit, or the voice that says learn? Don't rush the answer. Just notice what feels familiar. Because that internal voice becomes your guide. And here's something most people don't realize. You can train that voice. Every time you face discomfort and continue anyway, you weaken the voice of doubt and strengthen the voice of resilience. It's not dramatic. It's subtle, almost invisible at first. But over time, it changes who you believe you are. And identity is powerful. Once you see yourself as someone who pushes through pain, you stop fearing difficult moments. You expect them. You prepare for them. You grow through them. And that's when something incredible happens. The tears you once saw as weakness become symbols of effort. Proof that you're investing everything you have into becoming better. Let me ask you something honestly. When was the last time you struggled so hard that it made you emotional, but you kept going anyway? Think about that moment. Because hidden inside experiences like that is the foundation of confidence. Real confidence. Not the loud kind people perform on social media. The quiet kind. The kind that says, "I've been through worse. I'll handle this." And once you reach that point, life starts to feel different. Challenges stop feeling like threats. They start feeling like opportunities to test your strength. But here's the final realization most people need to hear. Because becoming successful isn't about eliminating pain. It's about transforming your relationship with it. And when that transformation happens, something powerful emerges. You stop crying because you're ready to give up, and you start crying because you refuse to stop trying. But there's one last truth about success most people don't realize until it's too late. And once you understand it, you'll never approach your struggles the same way again. Here's the final truth about success that most people realize far too late. Success isn't built in the moments when everything is going well. It's built in the moments when you want to stop, When motivation disappears, when doubt is loud, when the path ahead looks unclear, those are the moments that quietly decide your future. Because anyone can keep going when things feel easy, but the people who eventually create something meaningful are the ones who keep moving when their emotions are telling them to quit. Now think about your own life for a second. There were probably moments where you almost walked away from something important. Maybe it was a goal you cared about, a skill you were trying to learn, a dream you weren't sure you deserved. And somewhere in the middle of the struggle, you felt overwhelmed, maybe even emotional, maybe even close to tears. And here's the part most people misunderstand about that moment. They assume those emotions mean they're losing control, but in reality, it often means the opposite. It means you're confronting something that matters deeply. And when something matters deeply, emotions naturally appear. The problem isn't feeling those emotions. The problem is what you decide to do next. Some people treat emotional moments as a signal to walk away. They tell themselves they'll return later. They promise they'll try again when they feel stronger. But later often becomes never. Because the truth is, strength isn't something you wait for. It's something you build through action, through discomfort, through continuing even when your feelings are messy. Now here's something most people won't admit out loud. Sometimes the reason we cry isn't because life is unfair. It's because deep down, we know we're capable of more. But stepping into that potential requires courage, and courage is uncomfortable. It forces you to face uncertainty, to risk failure, to accept that things might not go perfectly. But here's the beautiful paradox. The same courage that scares you is also the thing that frees you. Because the moment you stop running from difficulty, you start discovering how resilient you actually are. Think about a time in your life when you survived something that once felt impossible. Maybe it was heartbreak, a financial struggle, a personal failure that shook your confidence. At the time, it probably felt unbearable. But you made it through. And if you're honest, you're stronger because of it. That's the strange power of adversity. It introduces you to a version of yourself you didn't know existed. A version that's tougher, more patient, more capable of handling uncertainty. And once you meet that version of yourself, you stop fearing challenges the way you once did. You begin to trust your ability to adapt, to recover, to keep moving. And that trust is the real foundation of success. Not talent, not luck, not perfect circumstances. Just the belief that no matter how difficult things become, you'll find a way forward. Now pause for a second and imagine something. Imagine looking back on your life 10 years from now. Think about the version of yourself you hope to become. Stronger, more confident, more fulfilled. That version of you isn't created by avoiding hardship. It's created by walking through it, by allowing difficult moments to shape your character instead of shrinking it. And yes, sometimes that process includes tears. But those tears don't represent surrender. They represent effort. They represent caring enough about your life to keep pushing forward. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, the next time the pressure feels heavy, remember this simple truth. You're not crying because you're weak. You're crying because you're human. And being human means feeling deeply while still choosing to continue. That's the real meaning behind the idea, don't cry to give up. Cry and keep going. Because the people who eventually succeed aren't the ones who never struggle. They're the ones who refuse to let struggle define their limits. If this idea resonated with you, take a moment to sit with it. Sometimes a single shift in perspective can quietly change the direction of your life. And if this message felt familiar, stay around, because the journey toward becoming stronger, calmer, and more in control of your life is just beginning.